When considering design or interior design, many of us will be aware of different styles, whether it's in our residential home or the spaces we move through. These styles might include like the Hampton style or European or Asian, with many of us bringing back ideas and artifacts from places like Bali or Singapore. But what does an Australian style of interior design actually look like? Or more to the point, what would a style of design that's influenced by the land and the deep culture here in Western Australia look like? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because practically nobody is putting that forwards. That is, with the exception of this week's guest, Leah Bennet. Leah talks through the nuances and intricacies of interior design so that we can understand it in more clarity and more depth. And then she adds in this layer of culture and land upon it. So you can really begin to get a feel of how she's creating spaces that we can actually really connect to. Leah also talks about the challenges of getting this new approach to interior design forwards, and how often some people want to get involved but are just a bit too worried about getting things wrong. Leah is a fantastic and articulate lady to talk to. She's got a real drive and passion, which I really think is going to take her many, many places. So she's really one person to look out for into the future. So enjoy Leah. Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host, Bryn Edwards. Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming Leah Bennet onto the show. Leah, welcome.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about design today. In particular, interior design, because you are an interior designer. But we're going to look at it with a bit of a twist, aren't we?
Yes.
Or less of a twist, more of a local focus.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, and we'll come to that in a minute. But let's orientate ourselves right at the start of this with, what does an interior designer do?
Yeah, the question that we all get asked over and over again. So there's many people that fit under the design umbrella.
Yeah.
You've got architects, interior designers, interior stylists, and there's a little bit of confusion on who does what. So your interior designer will do everything from your spatial plans, your furniture layouts. Majority of the time they do a lot of the finish selections, so selecting your tiles, paint colours. Along with doing the furniture layout, they will specify particular furniture pieces, tapware, that sort of thing. That's everything that I'm capable of doing. So it goes right from a planning process through to doing technical drawings for building applications, through to 3D renders, which is kind of creating the space through a digital program so that people can get an idea of how the space is actually going to look, which is a huge selling point on clients because it allows them to see the space before any construction's begun. And sometimes people have an idea of what they want in their head, and then when they actually kind of see what it is going to look like, it's not what they were thinking or not what they were
It doesn't
wanting.
quite work.
Yeah, and then I that's also a good way to kind of explain to a client if they are wanting something that you can see is not really going to achieve the end goal that they want, that it's a way of showing them before construction's commenced, and a lot of the time then they can see, okay, no, let's switch that up and do things differently. So it's a lot more than just fluffing cushions. I mean, at the end when you're doing the styling side of it, it is that fun element where you get to pick the decorative pieces and do your soft furnishings, your throw rugs and your cushions and that, which is an important part of finishing off a space and tying it together. Your interior stylist will do that end section. Interior designers kind of do start to finish. Your architects look more at the construction side of it and how it's going to be built.
I guess, like you say with the rendering, the thing that sprung to mind there was that so the best analogy I can give you is me going in and asking for a haircut, right? Sometimes the words I say don't necessarily translate into what the hairdresser
and
computes,
that's,
and then I end up with something, and I have done, where I sit there and go, how did we get to this place?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and that's one of the important steps that I've missed before was your mood boards and your inspiration boards and style guides, which is taking what a client said, putting together their needs and wants and a proposal for them, and then putting a pitch together, which has, okay, so you've said that you want to go industrial style, but this element that you really like is super classic and it's not going to work in that sort of style. Which we have a client at the moment that we were working with in Applecross, and we'd had they'd gone through a few sort of designers, and they had kept putting out there to the designer what they liked and the style that they thought they wanted to go in, but nobody had really sat down with them and explained, this is this style, this is this style.
Yeah.
And these, you can bring in certain elements of each together to work together, but some things just will clash and won't work together. And it's, if you're not a designer, you don't have the vocabulary to sometimes express what you're actually wanting. Yeah,
I can imagine that being
which is
a big chunk of the job.
A benefit of then going through a designer, because sometimes you can go to, I don't know, if you're going to a kitchen designer or a tile store and you're saying, I want this, and then you go somewhere else and you're like, oh, I like that, I want this, and then when it actually comes together, it doesn't work. And it's having that ability to be able to see what it's going to look like as a complete finished product.
So that gives an idea, super orientates us in terms of what an interior designer does. So one of the things why I reached out to you was because that your focus is slightly different to that of many interior designers here in WA. Do you want to explain that?
So I think design should be a lot more than just aesthetically appealing. There are designers that focus more on practicality and function, which all designers should do, and it should all be aesthetic. But I guess with the mentors that I've had some really great mentors. Dwayne Rowland from Carding Construction, he's kind of challenged me to think, well, what more can you do with it? Or what sort of benefits, how can you benefit people out of the designs that you're creating? So what my niche and where my focus has gone is bringing Aboriginal culture into contemporary design. So when I say contemporary design, I'm talking about modern spaces, whether it's interior or exterior, because I think that a lot of people have the connotation that it's a really, really old culture, but it's not relevant in today's society, which my argument is that it's just as relevant today as ever. And my reasoning for doing that is that it's a way that I can get people to gain an emotional and tangible connection to Aboriginal culture, because it wasn't meant to be read about in a book, it was meant to be shared and experienced, and my way of being able to do that is through design.
And you have a background in this.
Yes, so I'm a descendant of the Wadjuri Noongar mob from Ravensthorpe region. So why it's so important to me is, I guess, because I have that heritage, but we didn't know that we were Aboriginal growing up.
With the greatest respect.
Yeah, I don't look. Don't worry.
Let's just tick that off.
There's actually a lot of Aboriginal people out there with pale skin and green eyes and ginger. I'm not naturally ginger.
All right, okay. Light coloured hair.
Yeah, light coloured hair. But it was when my granddad was passing away that we kind of got our acknowledgement and recognition, and even found out that we were Indigenous. And for me, it was really bizarre to think that my granddad had grown up knowing or not knowing that his mum, that this huge portion of who she is, she wasn't able to share and pass down to her kids. So
this is your great-grandmother?
Yeah. So I'm also a dancer. And to put that into perspective, to me, it would be like if I had kids and I could never teach my kids dancing or even tell them about what dancing is. That's kind of how I put it into perspective for me. And just that thought it was just crazy to think that that's how.
Quite sad.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty incredible how we got our recognition and acknowledgement was through all of these letters that we had found from after the Second War. My granddad's uncle had returned from, must have been the First War, World War One. And he was in the 10th Light Horse, and he was super respected in the war, but came back and he was quite dark. And then there was letters about him not being allowed into the Veterans Club and bits and pieces because he was Aboriginal.
Right.
So that was kind of how we got our proof in the end,
Yeah.
and our recognition. But growing up and not knowing and not being able to have that cultural knowledge passed down through my family, I feel like I missed out on so much.
Yeah.
And so that's why now I feel like if I can bring it into design elements where everybody has the opportunity to learn and connect.
As well as yourself through the work that you do.
Yeah, as well. I've learnt so much through the connections that I've made. It's actually funny, had a meeting with Dwayne and he introduced me to one of his mates, Barry Maguire. And I sat down at the meeting and he goes, "You're related to me," which most Aboriginal people will laugh at because you meet another Aboriginal person and there's some way that the majority of the time you're connected or related. But yeah, he's from the same his family's from the same region as me. So
wow.
It was pretty amazing. And he's been super supportive, and I've been really lucky that I've been able to make these connections in the business industry or in the business network that I can go back to for cultural support and knowledge.
I was going to ask you more about that. I probably will come to that in a bit.
Because I don't, as I said, I've always been very transparent about the fact that I've grown up not knowing a lot, but I've wanted to learn and I've reached out, and I try to reach out to as many different people and elders that I can to get to do things the proper way.
How are you generally received?
I think a lot of people can tell that I'm pretty genuine in what I do, and because I don't say that I know everything, that I know that I have a lot to learn in that sense, that they're pretty receptive of what I want to do, and they can definitely see that I've got the drive and passion behind me to make some real changes in the design industry, at least. Well, that's my way of doing it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be good to orientate ourselves again, so we can actually, I and the listener can understand sort of from the inside out what it is exactly we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So what I thought would be interesting was if you could give me some points of reference, like underline coordinates, as to parts of, elements of interior design that the everyday person would notice.
Yeah.
And then if you could sort of explain, this is what we would probably be used to if we were going towards an American European style.
Yeah.
But this is how I think about it.
Yeah.
So then I and the listener can actually begin
see
to
the comparison.
and tangibly start to experience it.
Yeah. So I guess this direction of where I've headed and why I've got such a drive to create a authentic Australian and more specifically West Australian style started from a uni project that I was doing where we were exploring reducing the vacancies in the east end of the city of Perth, and my proposal was to do an inner city yoga studio, and I was looking at bringing in the Aboriginal culture, having some wallpapers put up, and I was looking at Indigenous style tiles, and I could not find any products. Couldn't find any products, and it was just like, there's a whole missed market here, and I wanted to draw then on our history and our culture, but I could find tons of Moroccan and Nepalese style tiles that worked in with the yoga studio. But you look at a lot of the patterns and there's a lot of similarities that would cross over in that sort of setting, but I couldn't find any that would work that were Australian or Indigenous.
Yeah.
So that was kind of where I realised that there was this missed opportunity in the market. But then I started to look at it more broadly, and a lot of people still, with clients, you'll get asked for Hampton's style kitchens or classic kitchens or a European kitchen. European kitchens are a lot more contemporary. For me, a lot of the time I see that they're the darker, moodier sort of tones,
Right.
where you don't have your handles, everything's quite flush, your push to open cabinetry, that sort of style,
Yeah.
sleek finishes. And then your American style kitchens or your European style kitchens, your American style kitchens are a lot more classic, where you've got the Hampton style cabinetry, your antique-y sort of looking handles and pull knobs. But if you went into a kitchen place here and said, I want an Australian style kitchen,
What does that mean?
what does that mean? It's very broad what that kind of covers.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm starting to see it develop.
Yeah.
For me, it's your kitchens that connect directly to your outside space, because half the time of the year we're outside cooking as well. And I think that it's done well when it's brought in with a lot of your Australian timbers. So you have your spotted gum and your jarrahs, which are coming back around and becoming more popular.
Yep.
But it's still, as a base, quite monotone. You've got your whites, your greys and your blacks,
Yeah.
which is just,
It's a bit dull,
it's
really,
not
isn't it?
really, to me, an Australian
Yeah.
style or an Australian feel. I wouldn't look at that and think, oh, that's, apart from the timbers, I wouldn't look at it and think, oh, it's Australian.
Yes.
For me, having your eucalyptus tones, having your burnt orange sort of colours coming
Yeah.
into it is where we have the opportunity to bring some colour into our homes and also create a style which is uniquely Australian.
Now, it's interesting because using the word Australian,
Yeah.
one could go to the modern day culture of what
Yeah.
Australia, but you've gone to land.
Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, you're talking about eucalyptus tones and burnt orange tones.
Maybe that's the Aboriginal in me
Well,
getting
yeah,
connected,
yeah, and-
automatically connected
But,
to, yeah.
yeah, but this is the point,
Yeah.
and this is what I wanted to explore and understand in this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have seen, I guess also because in the design trends that I'm seeing come through, which are kind of pulling on the Australian landscapes. If you go to, have you been to the QT in Perth here?
No.
So I went, when I first came into the design industry, leaving uni, did a tour there with my business mentor, Kerry Allen, and a lot of the colour palettes there were drawn from West Australian, which is where I kind of first saw it happening as well, where I was like, oh, this is good, we need more of this. But it was done in a very abstract, contemporary sort of way.
Yeah.
So a lot of the colour palettes in the rooftop bar there are drawn from the aerial footage of Shark Bay, which is the contrast of the oranges and the blues, which is exactly what I was doing with that yoga studio, which was funny because I started to see it pop up a little bit more. And then some of the hallways there have got, rather than having, you know, typical boring photos of wildflowers on the wall, they've like grabbed one and blown it up and then done it where it wraps around the stairs. It's just putting a little spin on it. How do you create or take something that's already been done or created and add a new spin onto it? Which is then what I'm trying to do with the Aboriginal culture, rather than just taking something that's more the traditional side of it, but I'm focusing more on the contemporary art pieces.
So how do you do that? I mean, I can see how you've linked to land.
Yeah.
To add this layer of culture, Indigenous culture. What are some of the sort of elements in there we're looking at?
So my argument with that, and what I have struggled with in terms of what I'm doing is quite niche, and there's not a lot of people doing it.
Yeah.
Is the mindset of when it should be included.
Yes.
So I've had a few proposals that I've done to some larger commercial, for some larger commercial products or projects, and they kept saying to me, it sounds like an art project, that sounds like a phase 2.
Yeah.
Why?
So when you say it sounds like an art project, it sounds like phase 2.
Because what I was doing was facilitating an Aboriginal artist. I don't do the art myself.
Yeah.
I don't have the knowledge to do that. So I'm facilitating a Aboriginal artist and putting it into a design element through wallpapers, through flooring, through the actual design.
So we're not just talking cushions and pictures on the wall.
Yeah, so
we're talking before that.
Yeah, so that's exactly my argument, is that it shouldn't just be cushions and art on the wall, because to me that's an afterthought, which isn't that part of the problem. Isn't that part of the problem? That
Kind of a metaphor in and of itself,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. That when I was a little bit discouraged. That kind of drove me, those meetings, a little bit more, because I just realised that...
Does that put fire in your belly when you get those? Yeah, I can see in your eyes.
It was just, they had reached out. The reason that I approached this company to do this is because they had reached out to elders to get site-specific stories before the project went, and then they handed it over to architects, and I'd seen some of the proposals and I was like, I can't see how these stories have been put into place at all. And then it's just going to be a phase 2, which is saying that Aboriginal culture then needs to work around what is already there in terms of the building, but in reality what came first.
Yeah, which is, and the building has come from a mindset that is probably
my
weird, Western industrial, educated, rich and democratic.
So what I'm trying to say is that it should be driven from the culture, rather than the culture having to work around the building. So in that sense, it's bringing things into the design from the beginning. It's not art on the wall, because everybody walks past art on the wall, and you need to have something that's actually going to make people stop and look and take in. And I guess this also has kind of come back from, before my design degree, I did a acting degree, with which was a double degree in contemporary performance and theatre studies. And essentially what that whole degree was taking a play, an existing play, and flipping it and thinking how we could do it differently, but also how you could get a certain reaction from the audience or get them an emotional response. Which, when I first left that, I didn't leave that degree, I finished that degree, but then got out into the industry, realised it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was a little bit disappointed in myself when I had built up all of this HECS debt, and then I felt like I was going to do nothing with it. But then I didn't realise how much of that was actually going to influence the way that I design, because then I've brought all of that into my design, and it's like, well, how can we actually get a response from the design? How can we get people to emotionally connect? Because that's the biggest thing for me, is that people read about or learn about your Aboriginal history in high school and primary school, and for me, that's where I learnt about majority of it until I left and then went down this venture. And I think where a lot of this disconnect happens with Indigenous culture is because people have this perception of what they learn in high school and then have no way to connect to it, because it's just so different to, it's never put into, as I said, like me thinking about not being able to pass down the knowledge of dancing. Nobody thinks about it in perspective to how it would affect them or put it into their life. So a lot of people have the idea that Aboriginal art is dot paintings, and it's not.
Well, there's more to it.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. That's one
thing,
one style. And I remember what I learned at high school kind of gave the perception that it was, and I don't believe this, but it gave the perception that it was an uneducated civilization. We never really learnt about the complexity of the culture, which is what I'm trying to do with my design, is raise awareness that...
The nuance, the subtlety, the complexity.
That there's more, it's more than just dot paintings. All of the paintings have meaning. There's all of the Dreamtime stories, there's all of the knowledge of bush medicine, there's all of the years and years of that they worked out that certain mobs could only marry other mobs, so that they had created like a elite sort of, that they had healthy bloodlines because so that there was no crossing over. There's so much more to it, and there's so much more that I know that I still have to learn. And
as I have found out recently through people I've spoken to on the podcast and things that I've done, it was interesting when you're talking about, you know, contemporary performance and stuff, is that I've learned that, you know, language and words is only just one part of it. You know, there's art, song, dance, stories, language. And once I have started to engage with more of that, it's given me more avenues than I've ever had in my life to express myself. Whether it's Bryn's little doodle pad,
Yeah.
which nobody sees, but I freely doodle in it and they make sense to me.
Yeah.
Or singing in the car,
Yeah.
you know, by myself. Yeah, so it's interesting when, you know, going back to where we were before, you're saying about, oh, that sounds like a phase 2 thing.
Yeah.
That in and of itself, I can now begin to orientate as such a, pent up, lack of understanding of how to express.
And I think
And
that,
it's such a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
Because then otherwise it's like, you know, just another stark square building.
yeah, with some
With
paint on
some
the wall.
nice stuff in it. Right. As opposed to, whoa, what's this I've just stepped into?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I want to do as well is to have meaning behind the designs that actually raises awareness. So, for example, one of the projects that I worked on for a school was just meant to be a mural, but the way that we did the mural was having the rainbow serpent coming down over the stairs, so that from the front it looks like it's moving over the land, which is reflecting the story of how the rainbow serpent shaped the land. So it's more than just art on the wall, it actually has the meaning behind it.
Yeah. So there's, again, this subtlety and nuance and complexity all interwoven.
Yeah.
So you can access it at lots of different places.
Yeah.
Aside from your couple of disappointing projects where they didn't get it, how has this generally been received? And surely it must take a fair bit of education. I mean, we're having to have a conversation to orientate.
There's a lot of people that I've had very positive feedback from a lot of people and a lot of support. A lot of people have said, love what you're doing. But when it's actually come time to engaging with projects, I think people are still a little bit scared
of
doing it the wrong way. And I think that that's also, yeah.
So when you say the wrong way, what do you mean the wrong way?
As in, I think that a lot of people have the good intentions of wanting to have more cultural inclusion, but they're either not sure how to approach the project. So for more teachers, I was talking to a few teachers and they want to bring in more knowledge through their school, but they don't know how, because there's certain things that you have to be Noongar to teach. Then there's certain things that then they're like, well, I don't really know or understand what I can and what I can't teach.
And you don't want to get it wrong.
And you don't want to get it wrong.
Particularly in a modern day context of not offending people.
Yeah, but
then you can get lambasted for that.
Yeah, and I think that there just needs to be, people need to kind of get over the fear of doing it wrong and just realise that there's so many people that you can reach out to that can do it right. Because even with me, that I am Aboriginal, I always, when I'm working with artists, I always go back and I ask them, is this okay with how your art's being used? Are you happy for that? Has it changed how it's going to be perceived or anything like that before it goes through? So I think that if you are quite open and just willing to reach out to there's a lot of people that do consultancy, that have a consultancy sort of business that can provide knowledge and provide direction. If you go about it in the right way, even if you sometimes fumble and do things where they are slightly not correct, or you may, I think if you have the right intentions a lot of the time as well. But at the same time, you still need to ask for permission.
Yeah.
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 I guess it comes back to doing it from the right place.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I could understand how, because going back to the question of how it's been received, I can understand how there's something there which is pulling many of us once we, from the outside, that's pulling us, because there is genuinely something bigger there, and then you want to know, you want to be able to experience, you want to be involved.
There's I was gonna say, it's definitely more there's more desire for it now. Like the support is growing, and it's a great time. It's a great time for it to happen because there is that growing support. And with schools, we're seeing a lot more genuine dedication, and that's the thing that I'm keep going back to is like a genuine dedication rather than
token tick box.
Yeah, token tick box, which for me is even to some extent. I did a project and I had some of the colours were ochres and your colours of your land and that sort of thing, and then they wanted to go back to your red, black and yellow, and I was just cringing.
It's a bit more to it than that.
Yeah, because I'm like, that's what we see as Aboriginal. It's then ignoring everything else.
Yes.
Whereas that's all of your ochres and your burnt oranges and those sort of colours are more than your primary black, red and yellow. Whereas to me, that was just like, oh, we'll include the colours of the flag so that it's obviously Aboriginal, which is where I think we need to make sure that it's obvious enough is where becomes tokenistic.
Which is such a Western thing. Got to make it really obvious.
Yeah, let's make it really obvious, which is where it then becomes tokenistic, and then everybody goes, oh, I can't relate to this.
Yeah.
That doesn't understand anything.
Because they're pretty stark colours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they're pretty like...
I mean, I would never do an interior that's red, black and yellow. Oh, yeah. But that's where the shift is in... So I'm doing a bit of product design as well with saying that I realised that there was this missed market. So one product, can't really talk about what the product is. Another product which is getting produced over in Sydney at the moment is a modular sofa which I've created, which is based on the sevens boomerang shape. Right. So the reason that I did it around the sevens boomerang is because I didn't want it to be around the traditional boomerang shape, because I wanted to make people aware that, there's more than one boomerang.
So what shape is this?
So it's kind of like that.
Right.
That sort of shape.
Right.
Yeah.
But on the... Yeah.
So a lot of people have the perception that the boomerang is the same across all of Australia and that's the only boomerang, but it's not. And then I've worked with a Indigenous artist as well, so that she's created 2 art pieces which we've done in 3 different colour ranges. We've got 6 fabric options as well. One's quite contemporary, so it just has the symbol of human or man.
Yep.
And then she's done another one which is more like your song lines and journeys. So that we've got the 2 different options there. One's a bit more traditional, one's a bit more contemporary. But lost my train of thought of where I was going with this.
That's all right.
What was I talking about before I started talking about the sofa?
Crikey, normally I'm really good. I was sat in grocery, I'm following the sofa.
That needs to be obvious. So the reason that I didn't want it to be obvious is I wanted it to be a pattern that somebody thinks, oh, that's really cool. And it's a bit more of that graphic design sort of feel. So it's like, oh, I love that pattern, love that print. And then they come up to it and approach and realise, it's an Indigenous pattern.
Oh,
Whereas,
cool.
I like it because of what it looks like.
Yes.
And I'm not buying it because it's Aboriginal.
Yeah.
I'm buying it because...
It's good.
It's good and I like it, and I would put it in my home rather than, I need to go out to find that just to meet that criteria.
Because then you're entering into the market like every other product without the, how should I put it, the modern day political correctness. You need to buy this because you're in Australia, don't you know?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Which is what I wanted to steer clear of, that it was more like, I love that sofa, I love the look of it.
I love the sofa, I love the design, I love the print.
But then it's got this
and it's got this thing. Oh, that's cool.
So the story behind
unfolds.
Is more of a added bonus to actually liking the product. Because I think that there are a few products really cool out there as well where you do see your Indigenous prints on it, but to me it's quite, has that quite in your face, which then a lot of people either feel like they can't purchase it if they're not Aboriginal, or they just don't know how to relate to it because they're like, well, I don't understand the story, so I should just steer clear of it. And a lot of the time that is dot, which is not nunga.
Yeah.
So your nunga is a lot more of the lines, which is where a lot of the interior spaces that I've created. So for one of the rooms in the Applecross residence that I was working on, there was 4 bedrooms there, and we wanted each room to have its own story. And so I'd kind of had this crazy idea, which I didn't really think was gonna fly, but I was working with my mentor Kerry and said, oh, what if we did each room sort of around a different point in time sort of thing, because the house was a heritage home and it had this rich history, and the client was super supportive of restoring the house back to its former glory, and was really wanting to keep some of those heritage items through the home, and in other areas that had kind of been stripped out a little bit. So this was a good opportunity for us to bring back some of that cultural side of it and the historical side of it. So for one of the rooms, I came up with the idea of basing it around the Indigenous history of the site.
Right.
Which being an Applecross was like a popular hunting area. And I came across a Whadjuk Noongar artist, which is Yondi Shane Hanson, and I had seen one of his pieces, which his work is incredible, but it has that traditional feel, but it's so applicable in a contemporary space. He uses a lot of black and white tones.
Right.
So instead of putting it on the wall as a piece of art, we engaged to use it as a wallpaper instead. Oh, wow. And then the rest of the room revolved around that wallpaper.
Cool.
Yeah, so the colour palettes then, as much as that was black and white, which I know I said we needed to move away from the black and white, we then drew on a lot more of the ochre tones through the bedding, the bed head, the rug and everything.
So earlier on you talked about support from the wider environment, the wider culture, community was the word I was looking for. How has that come through?
How have I found the support that I've had?
And how do they provide the support into this? I mean, I think one thing that springs to mind is that interior design is a quite modern thing. Yeah. Whereas what we're talking about here is a culture that's 60, 80,000 years old. Yeah. So we're talking about something that's just turned up in the last, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years. So it's really quite small if you look at it. So how does that translate into help for what you're doing?
I think given the timing of everything, as in that there is a lot more desire for cultural inclusion, a lot of Aboriginal artists that have worked in traditional art forms and more contemporary pieces are seeing that this is an opportunity to get their art out there and to put it onto different mediums rather than just art, because there's a lot of amazing Aboriginal artists out there, and I think that the ones that are willing to give themselves a point of difference are willing to do so because it will help them.
Yes.
The business side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the commercial drive.
And then I guess a lot of I've done a lot of networking. So at the start of the year was when I first went out on my own. Before that, I was working part-time with Carden Construction, which is an Aboriginal construction company. So I made a lot of good connections through them and was able to get in front of a lot of the right people doing proposals and stuff like that, so that people were kind of becoming aware of what I'm doing. I'm also planning on doing a business launch in a few months so that I can actually put my face out there and say this is what I'm doing, because I know that I have received a lot of support, but I know that there's a lot of people that have probably come across me a little bit too late in their project.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh, I wish I knew that that's what you did.
Yeah.
So just need to get in front of them sooner.
Indeed. What would be the ideal project for you?
I would love to do which this is really funny because when I was at uni, I was like, oh, that would be boring. And now I'm in the industry.
How you've grown up.
Yeah, now I'm in the industry and I would love to do a hotel.
Yes.
For me at uni, I was like, oh, that's just a room after room, boring, same thing. But I think doing a high-end luxury hotel with Indigenous culture would be amazing, because off the top of my head, there's not really a hotel that is embedded with culture in design, where it's not just art on the walls. Yeah. And for tourists coming from overseas,
I was going to say, yeah,
I still see at some hotels where there's kind of Asian design elements through our hotels here. You want to come here and experience our culture. When I go overseas, I want to go overseas and experience that culture.
Yeah.
I know some people like to go to Bali and feel like they're in Australia still and sit by the pool drinking cocktails, which is not really Bali, but
it's a different type of Australian culture.
Majority of people want to go overseas and experience the culture of that place that they're in. And I think that sadly, there's a lot of appreciation for Indigenous culture overseas, but not here. As in, I say that as in sadly, because it's appreciated more over there than it is here.
But wouldn't it be fantastic if the Indigenous culture, through things like you're doing, like, as you said, you could go to an Asian themed hotel here in Perth, if it was vice versa, and we started exporting more than just sport, neighbours, cheap wine and beer. Well, I'm probably guilty of this as well, but there is a lot of tourist companies as well that offer your Indigenous experiences, and they're probably a lot of overseas Asian, European people do those experiences more so than someone from Perth going to Shark Bay or going to Broome or whatever. Yeah. I need to find the time to do that. I've been meaning to. Yeah. But it's a bit hard to travel at the moment. True. But then it does touch back on some of the things that we were talking about earlier on, which is, even if you wanted to, how do you access that? And how do you not get it wrong? And that can leave you in a real I've experienced that. Just sort of coming out of, it's as a consequence of your work, but out of the work as a direct focus, how has the process of it creating your design company and doing the works that you've done, how has that furthered your knowledge of your ancestry and your background, which obviously you didn't know about until later in life? And what have you taken from that for you as a person? Good question. Eh? Good question. It's been probably up until recently, I didn't realise how passionate and how much drive I had about this. Up until, because I think until you experience some of the setbacks, as I said, like with those meetings and just the mindset, I didn't really gauge at how far we still have to go. And I mean, I haven't experienced racism myself because I'm white. But I've been in the industry, just become aware of that there is a big difference between somebody who has that genuine desire to do better and do different, and other people that meeting a criteria because they have to, or aren't meeting the criteria at all. So that's kind of been the biggest eye opener, I guess, for me being in the industry, and the process of developing my business. It's been
a big challenge because there hasn't really been anybody who is doing what I'm doing for me to kind of look at them for inspiration or direction. I've been finding my own way along the way, which a lot of, I guess, has been good in the sense of where I've found my inspiration has come from cultural knowledge more so than looking at Pinterest or looking at what other designers are doing. So it's been a challenge setting up my business, kind of going through it blindly, but I've been surrounded by some amazing mentors which have kind of helped me. As I said, I've got Kerry Allen, who's my business mentor, and Dwayne, who's kind of helped me with how to look at things differently, and then also lucky that I've got Barry in my corner who helps me with a lot of the cultural side of it. And the artists that I've worked with have been super supportive as well. So I mentioned Shane before. The artist that I worked with for the sofa was Buffy Kurana. So she's actually from Albany. Her family's from Albany way as well. So, so I've been lucky that I've been surrounded by people who've kind of believed in the direction that I've been going, but it's been difficult working out where I need to pitch my market to. And in the beginning, I was kind of going more towards commercial because I thought that the commercial projects would have the opportunity to do a lot more bigger scale, but so many commercial projects are so driven by budget and time that it doesn't really allow for the timing of, okay, well, how can we gain some stories from this specific site? And then we need to do a bit more research into how we can bring that into design and create that from the beginning. It kind of cuts itself short a little bit there in terms of the timing with the strict timelines that they have to meet and the deadlines. And I thought, this is probably not going to be as popular in a residential environment. But then, as I was saying, with that wallpaper project that I worked on, I was a little bit as hesitant with that. I didn't really think that it would be so well received, but I've had so much positive feedback for that. And I think that when it's put into a residential setting as well, because it's somebody's home, that it's more than just they're not doing it for the criteria.
They actually do it for
they're
that.
actually doing it because they genuinely want something that's meaningful.
And I guess drawing on a few data points throughout this discussion with your background in art and wanting to bring culture in, and you know, one of the things that shines through is that you're trying to create a response, an emotional response, so therefore there can be a connection. So therefore, I guess, just on a logical basis, it's not surprising that somebody in their own home, and it's an actual person that's buying your work, will connect with it, because an organisation is a mimetic entity. It's not a person. It's you know, this is the one thing that surprises me, how surprised people get when companies and companies and institutions don't act like people, because they're not people. They're mimetic. You know, they're a meme. They're made up. They don't really exist. They only exist because we agree that they should exist. A company, and so therefore there is no real heart and soul in it. You know, it's there for financial gains. Which is why you'll have time and budgets and things like that. So you have to probably find a couple of, unless you find, and I'm just working through this, unless you find the actual owner of the company, and then you actually deal with the person rather than the entity itself, it's always going to be a bit of a trouble, isn't it? You know, I've had this just as completely different, but I had this in the early part of my career with a background in business psychology. I'm trying to relate with people, but then you relate with the organisation about the people, but the organisation isn't a person.
It's funny because as designers, we're a lot of people, their point of difference or through their ethos will say that they're people-driven designers, that they're designers driven around what the person wants. But there's a big difference as well between the client and the end user a lot of the time in commercial settings.
100%.
which is where I guess what I'm doing is probably a lot more suitable in a residential setting.
Yeah. Well, the end
Apart from that hotel.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's different because
Yeah.
now you're doing it with people. But yeah, within an organisation, that end user comes under the auspices of human resources.
Yeah.
And listen to that now. That's lovely, isn't it? Human resources. So, given your depth of nuanced field of knowledge of design and spaces and how they're put together, how is it for Leah as you walk through Perth generally, going to different places and seeing the different design that you interact with on a day-to-day basis? How is that for you?
Well,
because you're obviously attuned to something that up until this conversation I wasn't.
everything in your life
Yeah.
has been designed
Yes.
by somebody, and a lot of people, I
With
think,
the exception of nature.
yes, which I think a lot of people forget that,
Yeah.
because it's just, you never, well, there's a little saying, you don't always notice good design, but you always notice bad design.
Yes. Yes. Very true. Yeah.
Yes, which I think Perth has a lot of potential. There's a reason that after graduating, I stayed in Perth. A lot of interior designers go over to Sydney and Melbourne.
Yep.
But I think part of that was growing up as a dancer. It was like, if you're ever going to do anything with your career, you have to leave Perth. And the only reason that that's true is because everybody that then goes into the industry leaves Perth.
Right.
Like, somebody needs to stay here and make Perth the centre of design or the centre of dance or whatever it is, because
You're the second person to have said that. The last one was
Really?
a previous guest
Yeah.
just recently,
Yeah.
who's a comedian.
yeah,
And she said the same thing. As soon as she got half good, everyone's saying, when are you going to Melbourne and Sydney? She's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm staying here.
yeah,
She's awesome.
yeah, because I don't know, I think Perth is underrated in a lot of ways. I love the bar scene in Perth.
Yes.
From when I was 18, 19, every time there was a new bar popping up, my friend and I would be like, oh, let's go check it out. And there's so many different styles of bars in the city. There's so many that have their unique little feel where you walk in, you feel like you're going into a completely different space, like an Alice in Wonderland themed one that's Babesh, which is like a 1920s themed one, which is another one of my favourites. But there is the potential here. I mean, Perth has been, I don't know how long back this was, but I remember reading in an article that it was in the top, okay, don't quote me on this because this is a while back.
Yeah.
But in the top 15 cities to visit for food and beverage in terms of the restaurants and bars scene in Perth, which when I first went into design, I wanted to do bars, I wanted to do restaurants. I still would love to do bars and restaurants with a decent budget and timeline.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that there's a huge opportunity here in Perth to really make some big design changes or some impactful designs, I should say. There's a lot of potential and opportunity here. It's just having, I guess, the funds to support it. But
Yeah, and the drive.
yeah,
And the commitment, collective commitment to do
Yeah.
that. I mean, I've seen a couple of the older pictures, and this used to be Art Deco Central.
yeah. I was just going to say, one of the things that happened with COVID, there's a few projects that I was working on, which it's very frustrating because even projects here in Perth then get outsourced to places in Melbourne and Sydney, or companies in Melbourne and Sydney. But because of COVID, they weren't able to come and do site visits and site measures and that sort of thing. So they were then engaging with Perth designers just to do that phase of the project with them.
Yeah.
But I think that when that all happened, it kind of made a lot of your clientele think, there's this whole industry here in Perth that's capable of doing what I'm outsourcing to Melbourne and Sydney. And I think that we just need to stop sending work over there and invest in the design industry here, which if COVID has taught us anything, it's you need to invest in your own backyard.
Yes. Yeah. I really like that. Yeah. investing in something other than monetizing molecules, which we seem to be very good at doing, digging stuff up and sending it overseas.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the things that kind of struck with me as well early in my career was went to a design product launch, and it was with a German designer, and they were asking him questions like this, and he was sitting and looking at the table, and there was a arrangement of native flowers, and he was just looking at this flower, and then halfway through he's like, this is amazing. And I think it was a protea or whatever he's like, I've never seen a flower like this. How is this a flower? And he was just amazed by this flower and thinking about all of these design things that he could do from this flower that is nowhere in Germany. But we see it so often that we probably don't realise what we've got in our own, in here in WA.
Yeah. Yeah. That has been one of the benefits of COVID, staying put.
Yeah.
And not having people coming in and people going out. The last question I ask all my guests, which is a hypothetical one, but I always enjoy listening to different people's answers, is if I could just chill everyone out, like everyone on the planet, for 10 minutes, and then Leah could pop a question into the collective consciousness so everybody just sat down quietly and thought about it, what would that be?
Quite a broad question, but just how can we do things differently? Because then I think if everyone kind of asked that question, no matter what industry they were in, how can we do things differently for better?
Not just for the sake of it.
Not for the sake of it, for better.
Yeah.
Because I think if everyone stopped and asked themselves that, things could be a lot different.
And I could see how that would come up for you, because you really are dealing with some of the deeper frames of reference that people hold and seldom go down to investigate and check in with to see if they're serving them. Yeah.
And it is kind of breaking down that existing process to push in the way that I want to do things.
Yeah.
Or the way that I feel things should be done.
According to Leah.
Yeah.
Strikes me that the designing is the easy part of your job.
Oh God, that just comes with running a business. Everyone's runs, like, as soon as they go into, I'm going to make my own business because I'm really good at this and I'm really passionate about it. And then you realise that that's 20% of your job. And then you become the accountant, you become the business developer, all of this extra stuff that you need to do all the time. It's been a huge learning curve, and a lot of personal growth has come out of running your own business as well, because as much as you're constantly reflecting on, okay, what's working, not working in the business, it's okay, well, what's working and not working for me?
Yes.
Or with how I work.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's stressing you out? What's making you anxious?
Yeah. But
what's lighting your fire?
Definitely the design side of it is the more easy. It's all of the things to get to the big goals. That's the hard side of it. Which is, well, just changing the mindset of how Aboriginal culture is included in contemporary design.
I've really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this as well. It's been
good.
I didn't realise that I could talk so much.
I suspected it was in there. If people want to reach out and connect with you, how do they do that?
So I'm on LinkedIn, which is my name, Leah Bennet. It's LeahBennet with one T, because there's uncommon spelling. I'm also on Instagram, which is Leah Paige Designs. Yeah. And
Leah Paige being your middle name?
Yes, Paige being my middle name. And then Facebook is the same, Leah Paige Designs, and I've got my website as well, which is www.leahpagedesigns.com.
Awesome. I look forward to doing another conversation with you in years to come.
Yeah, that will be good.
Yeah, let's set a date.
Yeah.
24 months from now, I want to hear
I want to see more and hear more.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to see that big project over there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. It's nice to meet you.
Indeed.